Thank you very much. So, I'm David, I make up stuff. How do I get there? So this is a map I showed briefly last year, and I was envious in several other talks I've seen, particularly masks, because I can't do masks, it's hand-drawn, I can't erase anything ever. So to get a mask, I've got to pre-plan where the text is before any other feature goes on there. So that's a bit of a challenge. That map's also written in Farsi. Anyone speak Farsi in the audience? Good, there's one grammatical error I've been told. So I had to cheat and write it left or right. Penmanship wasn't good enough. So how do I get there from an idea or a theme? What's my process? So just like you guys, I am a real cartographer. I just happen to make up the data. To do that, I've got to have what Sarah said early on in PCD, an understanding of the place I'm mapping. So I've got to learn the trace of the place that I'm setting in. I have to learn the history of the place because that informs how things are built, why they're built. Why is Las Vegas where it is? And if it was in Europe, would it be the same? And the answer is no. I have to learn the culture. I just drew a map in Korea. I've never been to Korea. I was absolutely fascinated. I now want to go to Korea. I have to learn the architecture, how buildings relate to each other, the size, the scale, how they interact with residential versus commercial. What type of highway interchanges? Do you have roundabouts or traffic signals? Are you really over-engineered? You know who you are. Road layouts. Are normal road layouts over-engineered? Why are they there? Do you have public transport? Do you have high-speed rail? And the buildings and their relation, and then I have to learn the language. Very occasionally I make up my entire language and the script language, transliterate it back to English, and then make up place names and transliterate it back. Because I'm obsessed. So here's a map set in northeast Italy, and I use a multiple variety of materials. So this one is drawn on a piece of birch, so the grain of the wood becomes my contour elevation. So I've got a topographic map as my starting point. I get very strange looks when I'm in Lowe's picking out pieces of wood when people who work there ask, can they help me find something? And the answer is, yeah, no, it's not going to help. So I have to study a part of Italy. For this particular one, I picked Udine because once I looked at that piece of wood, I then take it back and study the planet to find out where that type of grain and topography could exist. Everything I do is plausible. I want my maps to look like they could exist. I want people to look at them and have a sense of reality versus actual reality. So there's the piece of wood. As you can see, there are town names on it. So I have pre-planned, and this is the only planning I do for my maps, where the major locations are going to be. The only other planning, which you can't quite see on that, is I have to know where the bridges are, because I use a watercolor to paint the rivers. I can't remove anything, remember, so I've got to guesstimate where the bridges are going to be and hope my terrain and elevation and then my places line up with it. And I draw the maps in layers. You can see the top left, there is the start of a city, and the main roads and the main highway interchange locations, and that's it. Once it's finished, 3 months later, it looks a bit more like that, and that's zoomed in on the main town of Alefano. I sometimes have fun with my maps. There is a city on this map called Sopra il Lago di Sventura. Anyone speak Italian? The town name means above the Lake of Doom. I can play with language, I can research places, and if they have a theme to their language, then I can use it. So there's zoomed in. Occasionally I'm drawing every single building, and I'm imagining what it's used for when I draw it. So to do that, I have to understand the history of certain Italian cities. The bottom right is a rather complex highway interchange. The reason for that is the river is still used by the Navy, and they required the bridge to be high enough that all naval ships could be underneath it, so there's a massive elevation drop during the ramps. I take this stuff seriously, don't I? Okay. A variation on my research is when it's a commission. That last map I drew because I wanted to. I get inspired by somewhere, I draw a map of it. This is a commission. It's actually got a very sad origin, but it's set in southern England. It was drawn for a friend whose husband passed away very suddenly one New Year's Eve a few years ago. They had planned to do a map together. She decided a year later to do it on her own, And this map then became very personal. And in that process, I get about 4 pages of information: family history, places, names, pets, favorite TV shows, you name it. So for the research of this, is a little easier because I know English maps. So there's an example of an Ordnance Survey map, which I have borrowed some of their style, and I tend to draw my maps at about 1 to 50,000. And I used to feel really kind of a bit nervous about claiming I'm doing a kind of Ordnance Survey map until they featured me on their blog and put me on their website, and I thought, that's endorsement, that's good enough for me. So I at least will give them credit. So I've now zoomed in on that map. One of the things I do is I hide things. On the original map on the right-hand side in the trees, you can see some dates. So there's the date they were married in there. There are things in the shape. Top left, there's an acronym on the airport. So to get an acronym, I had to build buildings in the shape of, and someone else has already used this word, so I will say it. The acronym says, "Can't believe you fucking left me." It was her way of being angry at him and releasing that, so it's in the map permanently. And then bottom right, as a contrast to that, Lawrence Newtown, there was a deliberate subdivision that wasn't finished because that was her future. And she brought the map back 2 years later, and I added a bit of detail to it because she was moving forward. So that means I get to know people a lot more. And the detail of that, that's hand-drawn contours that are fictional, starting from scratch. And I tend to start at the bottom and work up. I've tried the other way around, and it gets a bit messy. Another style of map I do is a 20,000-foot aerial view at night of places that don't exist. But could. So the research for a city on the Gulf Coast of the Florida Panhandle was inspired by flying places and looking out of the window. How many of you automatically pick a window seat on a flight? Because, yeah. Actually, I should have asked the other way around. Why don't those of you that don't, why don't you get a window? So that was flying into Palm Beach. So that is a Florida. These two are flying into Seattle. So I flew in on Saturday evening and actually had a very good view of downtown. So now I'm obsessed with, okay, how do I represent that? Because to draw a map at night, you have to know what type of light bulbs they use in that country. Because the light density and the light colors change. You have to understand the way civilization has evolved. A map set in Florida has a very bright area right in the middle of that map. That's the car dealership and the mall. It is as bright as downtown, which that wouldn't happen in Europe, and it wouldn't happen in the Northeast. But in the south of the US, the population has changed. The use of downtowns has changed. So I can't just make up a place and say, oh, that's Florida. I do cheat sometimes in that I tend to light highways a little more than they would. Because without lights and those bridges, I've got a void that bugs me. So sometimes I light things that might not be in that part of the world. They can be, they are, but they're not always completely illuminated. So the highway system that goes around that town may or may not have lights in that part of Florida, but it could. It's plausible. I put a lot of credence on the word plausible. Okay, so we're going to shift gears slightly. We're going to go to Alabama. I also draw maps on people. A few years ago, a photographer looked at one of my maps on wood and said, that looks like skin tone. Have you ever thought about drawing on a person as body art? The answer was no, don't be stupid, that's a really bad idea, you're creepy. I didn't say all of that out loud. But he bugged me for a few months, and then I went away and researched, does anyone do temporary body art on people as maps? The answer was yes, but they're tending to do a weird projection of the planet around an arm or the torso, or they'll do a map on a pregnant person's stomach. No one, could I find, was using the terrain of the body as the terrain and putting a fictional place that meant something to that person. So I've drawn on people with scars and incorporated the scars. I've drawn on people who have had horrific accidents or had a double mastectomy and incorporated that as part of their journey. This one was inspired by flying into Huntsville Airport and seeing, what's the polite way of describing Alabama planning? Abysmal. That's the polite word. If we're flying to Alabama, you see towns, you see developments, some of it looks normal, and then you look at things that were once cotton fields, and they have house farms on them instead. There's fields that are completely disconnected from anything else, but there's a subdivision. And then a mile down the road, there's a repeat of that. Completely disconnected, completely insular, unplanned, except a developer came to the city and said, we want to do this, and they said yes. Alabama is weird. Sorry, Alex. They don't really plan. They allow things to happen. So here's another view. My house is on there somewhere. Anyone can spot it, I'll give you a prize. That's really creepy. I'm also very good at stalking people geographically. I had a friend who moved to Seattle a couple of months ago. He sent a picture from his office window. Here's the new view from my office. 4.5 minutes later, I had a Google view of his office, the orientation and the angle he was looking at from the top of his building. So don't send me pictures from planes, because I will pinpoint you. And it's kind of fun. But the reason I wanted to do this is I've realized that with some of my maps, I wasn't saying anything, and I've decided I should. So there's a social commentary now with some of my maps. The one I'm wearing is set in South Africa, and a lot of people that look at my artwork said, I didn't know South Africa had civilized cities. I'm trying to educate that what you think of as a development isn't necessarily where you think that might be. So I've done a lot of series of places. So that's actually the full map on that person, and you can see, depending on the angle they lie or stand, the rivers and roads flow as naturally as possible through the terrain of the body. And then there's the gold, which is subdivisions in the middle of nowhere with streets that don't make any sense, that deliberately disconnect people from each other, which seems like a really bad planning idea. There's another view of the main town, and Alabama has some nice old towns. And then they ruin them by putting highways through. That happened anywhere else? Yeah. Thankfully, Seattle has just demolished the Alaska Way Viaduct, so that's got better. I found this image that I'd chosen quite ironic. Is anyone else on the 7th floor of the hotel? This is the artwork on the 7th floor, the glass art, and it's about finding the right size bra. It struck me as funny. So anyway, I decided to go take a picture of that and put it in my slide to complement the fact that you're seeing breasts as part of a cartographic show. So I often do demonstrations of my work. In fact, next week, if anyone's in New Jersey, there's an exhibition called Maps Everywhere. And amazingly, Maps Everywhere was not taken as an Instagram name, which it's a brilliant name. So there's an exhibition in New Jersey called Maps Everywhere, and I have 2 of my pieces there, and I'm going to be doing a live demonstration and talk. If you're ever in Huntsville, Alabama, because you should be, that's a picture of my studio space, which I share with my wife, and I display maps from all over the place. The top right, notice the light colors in it are completely different than the nighttime map on the left. Left is northern England, the right is the United Arab Emirates. They have blue lights. It's really cool. And I have to figure out their highway layouts, because I'm pretty convinced the remit that a traffic engineer gets in the United Arab Emirates is make this look good from a drone. They have perfect circle highway interchanges for no reason other than it looks good from above. They've got some spare cash. So I had to boil down what I do into something that made sense, because people came into my studio and said, you do fake maps. I spent 4 months drawing that. That's really harsh. And I was taking offense until I realized fake is a compliment, because fake is a forgery. Forgery fools you into thinking it's real. So I just flipped it and decided I do real maps of fake places, because that's a lot easier to say than hand-drawn, plausible, fictitious maps. If you want lots of examples of my work, my Instagram has 992 posts, I think, now. So I'm close to 1,000. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and I'm here. If you want to see me afterwards, I've got some postcards as well that you're welcome to. And I have no idea how long that took, because I didn't practice this.